Hello, my friend. I've been expecting you. Have a seat. I made you some double vanilla pound cake and a cup of coffee. It has been quite a while since we saw each other last, and a lot has happened. But the important thing right now is this time together. The last time we met, I was sharing with you some of the early history of knitting and its origin in the Middle East. Fast forward 1,000 years, and knitting as we know it has made its way into Europe and taken root there. For much of history, knitting has been employed as a means to earn revenue, to provide warmth and covering for the family unit, or both. During the Renaissance, as fashion styles developed, the demand for knitted socks, hosieries, and undergarments increased, making it possible for poor households to turn to knitting these items as a steady source, sometimes the only source of income. Knitting was such an integral part of the economic revenue for the poor that Queen Elizabeth refused a patent for a mechanical knitting machine because, in her words, it would take away the only source of income for my poor people. A century later, in the British colonies in America, knitting was an essential part of each household. With the high cost of transporting goods across the Atlantic from England, colonists turned to using the resources at hand as much as possible. Knitting of socks, hosieries, and undergarments was not only a necessity, it was a requirement. In places like Hartfield, Massachusetts, each household was assessed and a quota was assigned based on the number of able knitters, both women, men, children, and elderly. Households that did not meet their quota were fined. We are very fortunate to be able to learn to knit at a leisurely pace in this time and age. For us, knitting is not a necessity as it was for our knitting ancestors. Before we begin, you should know that there are two basic methods of knitting. There is the British American method, which is common basically everywhere the British colonized, where you wrap or throw the yarn around your right needle. There is also the Old German, or more commonly known as continental style, where you hold the yarn in your left hand and pick the yarn with the needle in your right hand. I use the British American version. There are also two basic type of stitches. There is the knit stitch and the purl stitch. The most intricate pattern that you see, even the most intricate lace shawl, is just a combination of knit and purl stitches. So we'll begin with the knit stitch. For me, I learn better when I am working on a project than in the abstract. So we are going to make a scarf using our yarn that we learned to cast on with. So we are going to use our US 13 needles, 9mm, and our yarn in the number 5 bulky family. We are going to use about 350 yards of yarn. For this particular yarn, that's about 3 skeins. You can find the yarn pullout on the yarn label, which tells you how much yarn to expect from that particular skein. We are going to cast on 24 stitches, which will give us a scarf about 8 inches wide. If you want a more narrower scarf, cast on about 20 stitches. If you want a wider scarf, cast on 26 to 28 stitches. For a longer yarn, obviously use more yarn. For a shorter yarn, for a shorter scarf, use less yarn. So we are going to cast on 24 stitches using the long tail cast on method, and we're going to cast on loosely. After you have cast on 24 stitches, you will place your needle with the stitches in your left hand. This is your resting needle. The needle in your right hand is your working needle. You will notice that the stitches have a left side and a right side. The left side of the stitch is away from you in the back of the needle. The right side of the stitch is closest toward you in the front of the needle. What you will do is take your working needle in your right hand, and you are going to take the needle through the loop at the bottom of the needle in your left hand. You're going to go simultaneously from the left side of the stitch to the right side of the stitch as you go from the front of the needle to the back of the needle, like so. Then you take your yarn that's connected to your skein, wrap it around your right needle clockwise, and then come out the exact same way that you came in, with the yarn wrapped around your right needle past the neck of the needle. Then take the stitch off of the left needle. You've just made your first stitch. Let's do this again. Take your working needle in your right hand, and you want to pass it underneath the stitch in the needle in your left hand, your resting needle. Pass it over the neck. Then take the yarn that's connected to your skein, wrap it clockwise around your working needle in your right hand. Then come out the same way with the yarn. This sometimes happens. It may drop. Don't worry. Just wrap it around again. Hold on to it as you come out. And then take the stitch off of the left hand needle, your resting needle. An easy way I remember it is the rabbit goes down the hole. You put a collar around the rabbit, and the rabbit comes out the hole with the collar. Let's take a closer look at this. Continue to knit until you reach the end of the row. Once all the stitches have been moved from your resting needle to your working needle, take the needle with your stitches and place them in your left hand, and that needle without stitches in your right hand. This is now your new resting and working needle. Before you begin, make sure that all your stitches are vertical. As the garment increases, gravity will take care of this naturally, but in the beginning, you will need to do it manually. Another caution, the first stitch that you knit will be looser than the other stitches. So make sure that you are knitting into the top stitch and not the stitch below it. Place your needle through the stitch, wrap your yarn around, Take the needle off and take the stitch off your left needle. Continue, wrap the yarn around your working needle, take the stitch off your resting needle. Continue to do this until you reach the end of the row. When you knit each row, you get what is called a garter stitch. You can identify a garter stitch because it will look the same from the front and the back. It will be a row of bumps followed by a row that is smooth. A row of bumps followed by a row that is smooth. Well, look at the time. We have covered a lot of ground here today. I hope you enjoyed your pound cake and I enjoyed your visit here today. For next time that we meet, let's knit up an entire skein. Thank you so much for coming. Until next time, don't be a stranger.